drifted out of the tree line. It was the kind of sound that didn't echo. It sank, as though the forest soil swallowed it whole. Hours later, when the sun finally bled into the sky, a farm boy named Elias Turner spotted something dragging itself across the frost-crusted clearing behind Calvary Ridge. At first he mistook it for a wounded deer, but deer did not gasp out human words, and they did not leave a red smear behind them like a torn banner marking each desperate pull forward. Elias stepped closer, clutching the handle of his milk pail like a shield. The thing on the ground was a man, barefoot, clothes shredded, face gray with cold and terror. One eye swollen shut, the other rolling like it was searching for something that wasn't there, or never had been there at all. A hunter's vest hung from one shoulder, soaked through, and in his raw, trembling hands, he clutched a small length of torn fabric, the corner of a blue calico dress. "Help! God, help me!" he rasped, and Elias realized that the man's teeth were chattering not just from the cold. Something had broken inside him, so deep the winter air had no part in it. Sheriff Halverston reached the ridge by mid-morning. He recognized the man immediately, Nathaniel Brome, the youngest of 5 hunters who had marched into these woods the previous afternoon. A confident little procession of rifles, hounds, and liquor, laughing loudly enough for half the county to hear. Their quarry, villagers whispered afterward, was not a deer. They'd gone in after a missing girl, a black girl named Althea May Cotton. Nathaniel was the only one who crawled back out. The sheriff knelt beside him, boots sinking into thawing mud. "Where are the others?" he demanded. Nathaniel only shook, clutching that scrap of blue fabric tighter to his chest. "She wasn't alone," he whispered, though whether he meant the girl or something else, no one could say. Not then. This was the beginning of a story that would stain the county for generations. 5 men gone, 1 broken survivor, a missing girl, and a truth so misshapen the powerful families of Calvary Ridge would do everything in their reach to bury it deeper than the bodies themselves. Before we continue with the story of what truly happened in those woods, join our community of mystery lovers. Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which state you're listening from. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten stories like this one. The year was 1911, and Calvary Ridge sat on the northern edge of Georgia, close enough to the old rail lines to feel the hum of industry, but far enough from any real city that the nights still carried the scent of pitch pine and the distant howl of stray dogs scavenging through smokehouses. The town itself was a patchwork of porches, clapboard storefronts, and weather-tired churches, their steeples pointing upward as though demanding answers heaven had no intention of providing. The era was one of uneasy transitions. Electricity hummed through wealthier homes like a whisper from the future, but oil lamps still flickered in the cabins on the outskirts. Cars sputtered down Main Street twice a week, but mule carts remained far more common. And though the Civil War had ended nearly half a century earlier, the social realities of Georgia in 1911 were hardly transformed. When the sun went down, every house seemed to remember its own history of fear. Men in suspenders lingered outside the general store, speaking in low voices about new machines taking farmhands' work. Women hung wash on lines strung between crooked fences, gossiping about whose son had taken to drink and whose daughter had been seen sneaking notes behind the schoolhouse. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, tobacco spit drying on dust, and the metallic tang of railroad iron. There was a church bell that rang every evening at 6, a weary clang that drifted over the fields like a reminder that God was watching, though no one was quite sure if his gaze was protective or judging. Sermons on Sundays were loud and theatrical, the preacher slamming his fist upon the pulpit as if trying to summon some long-lost fear of divine punishment. People whispered afterward that hell seemed more believable than heaven these days. Racial lines, though never written on any street map, were carved into the land itself. Houses of the black community sat closer to the river, on damp soil that flooded each spring. Their church, a humble whitewashed structure with a bell too cracked to ring, leaned slightly from age, and life there moved with an unspoken vigilance, as though every shadow held memory of men who never returned home. Children played barefoot in the red dust, laughter sharp and bright but always quick to fade when adults approached. Mothers kept windows locked at night. Fathers walked with careful eyes after dark. Because in towns like Calvary Ridge, a missing black child did not raise the same urgency as a missing white one. Not in the sheriff's office, not in the courthouse, and certainly not among the men who claimed the forest as their birthright. Althea Cotton's disappearance changed that, if only for a moment. She was just 14, tall for her age, with hair tied back in 2 braids and a singing voice that could melt tension from the room. She had last been seen collecting water from the river, humming a hymn under her breath as the sun dipped low. When she didn't return, her mother went from door to door. Her father rode into town at dawn, raw-voiced and frantic. But the sheriff's office took its time. It always did. Hours passed, then a full day. Only when 5 white men volunteered, loudly, publicly, almost too eagerly to prove their own heroism, did the search finally begin. Those men were the ones who would vanish into the forest by afternoon, and it was Nathaniel Brome who would come crawling out at dawn like something newly birthed from the earth, muttering about the girl and what she brought with her into the trees. What followed would divide Calvary Ridge along every line it had tried so desperately to hide: race, faith, family, and fear. Yet, before the terror unfolded, Calvary Ridge looked almost peaceful, a town slouching toward modernity with one foot stubbornly planted in the past. Women gathered outside Silas Harper's bakery, their voices rising in the sweet, yeasty air. Children raced wagons down the sloping road by the feed store, and just beyond the fields, the forest stood silent and ancient, its pines rising like dark pillars against the horizon. Locals called that stretch of woods Gideon Hollow. It was said to be older than the town, older than the railroad, older than any memory carried by the living. The soil was rich with decaying needles and the ghosts of storms that had toppled entire generations of trees. Hunters swore the place felt wrong at night, as though the forest watched more than it grew. But men who wanted to prove themselves rarely listened to warnings carved into folklore. They carried rifles and whiskey, believing both could shield them from anything. That belief would die along with them. One by one, the stories would unravel. Families would whisper behind closed doors. Newspapers would circulate theories until the truth dissolved beneath rumor. And the names of the men who entered that forest, Brome, Halden, Cutter, Wardell, and Pierce, would cling to the town like mildew on old timber. Yet, in the beginning, Calvary Ridge looked like any other small southern town trying to survive the shifting tides of a new century. Horses snorted at hitching posts. Lanterns flickered behind lace curtains. The sheriff walked the boardwalk with the weight of complacency in his footsteps. And a girl named Althea Cotton vanished into the murmur of the river, leaving behind only a tin pail and a silence that settled like a storm waiting to break. What happened in that forest would not only define the fate of one child, it would reveal what people are willing to hide when the truth threatens to unravel the fragile order they depend on. And long before dawn of the next day, something in those woods began to stir, something that had been waiting, patient and hungry, for a very long time. The story of Calvary Ridge widens first through the faces of the people bound to the tragedy, each of them shaped by the land that raised them, each of them carrying shadows they did not yet know would soon stretch far beyond their own lifetimes. And like all stories that begin in the quiet before calamity, their introductions feel eerily ordinary, as though none of them understood that the forest had already chosen who would be devoured and who would be left behind to tell the tale. Nathaniel Brome had always been the smallest of the 5 hunters, though at 24 he still carried the gaunt eagerness of a boy trying to earn a place among men. His hair was pale blonde, the kind that made him look sun-touched even in winter. His jaw never quite squared the way he wished it would, and his hands trembled when he drank too much coffee. He worked in his father's carpentry shed, shaping cedar boards with quiet patience, but he had a habit of glancing toward the woods every few minutes as though listening for something only he could hear. People said Nathaniel had a poet's heart trapped in a laborer's body, a mix that made him uneasy around others. When he spoke, he did so carefully, choosing each word like it might collapse under its own weight if he reached for it too quickly. Once, his older brother claimed Nathaniel had cried after killing his first deer, though Nathaniel denied it away, staring at the fireplace until his eyes gleamed with unshed tears. The night before the hunt, he had been seen at Marlowe's tavern, sitting alone at a corner table while the others boasted loudly about cigars and cartridges. Tom Cutter clapped him on the shoulder and barked, "You coming or not, boy? Don't tell me you're fixing to hide behind your mama's skirts again." Nathaniel swallowed, jaw tightening. "I said I'd go," he muttered. "Just thinking." "Thinking?" Cutter laughed. "In that head? Lord help us if the forest hears you thinking." Nathaniel didn't reply, but he stared at his drink with an expression that suggested the forest already had. Tom Cutter himself was a man shaped by cruelty as much as by circumstance. Thick-shouldered, square-jawed, skin sun-chapped and ruddy from too much time outdoors. He had eyes that squinted even when he wasn't smiling, and a constant habit of chewing the inside of his cheek when irritated. Cutter was the sort of man who believed danger bowed before confidence, and that confidence grew from a willingness to impose one's will on anyone weaker. Folks said he'd once broken a mule's nose for refusing to move. Others whispered that his wife, Ruth, wore scarves in summer to hide the bruises that never quite faded from her collarbone. But Cutter himself walked the world with a swagger that dared anyone to question him. "That girl ain't dead," he said to the barroom the night before the hunt, voice thick with tobacco smoke. "Just hiding, and if she thinks she can make fools of us, she'll learn different." Someone asked him if he really believed the search was for altruism, or if it was just a chance to show off his rifles. Cutter grinned. "A chance for both," he said, tipping back his glass. "Can't fault a man for enjoying his work." Across the table sat Ellis Halden, the oldest among them, though age had done little to soften him. His beard grew in wiry tufts, more gray than black, and his eyes were hollowed by sleeplessness that no amount of whiskey seemed able to cure. Halden had been a deputy once, before he threw the badge into the sheriff's hands and declared he'd rather hunt animals than men. But the truth whispered in town squares was that Halden had seen too many scenes that stained the inside of his skull. Sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence, staring out at nothing, as though listening to echoes of things that had never truly left him. He spoke rarely, but when he did, the room quieted. "Forrest don't like noise," he said that night, voice raspy from years of cigarette smoke. "If that girl's in there, she'll be scared. We go yelling and stomping like fools, we'll drive her deeper." Cutter snorted. "You worry too much." Halden tapped ash from his cigarette. "And you don't worry at all." Between them sat the fourth man, Wardell Pierce. Tall, hair slicked back with homemade pomade, suit jacket just a little too fine for a hunting trip. Pierce fancied himself a gentleman, though his wealth came from money-lending practices that left more than one family in ruin. He had a smile as thin and sharp as a fresh blade, and a voice that carried the cadence of someone who liked to hear himself speak. "What matters," Pierce said, raising his glass, "is that we bring her home, safe and sound. The town sees us as men of action. Best we uphold that reputation." Cutter leaned in. "You're not fooling anyone with your Sunday suit, Pierce." Pierce smirked. "A man should always look prepared for company, even in the woods." Their laughter was uncomfortable, but it was laughter nonetheless. Only one man remained quiet at the table. Jeremiah Red Wardell. He was Cutter's cousin, broad-shouldered like him but with a slower, more deliberate presence. His hair was the deep rust that earned him his nickname, and his eyes were a weary hazel that missed nothing. Unlike Cutter, Red kept his anger buried under layers of silence. When Cutter boasted, Red simply drank. When others mocked him for not joining the rowdy shouts, he would respond only with a small, tired smile. He had lost his wife 2 years earlier to a fever that swept through the valley, and grief had settled on him like an invisible cloak, making his movements heavy. Cutter slapped his cousin's back that night. "Red'll keep us safe. Big as a bull, ain't scared of nothing except his own shadow." Red looked up slowly. "Forest is different," he murmured. "Men forget that." Cutter rolled his eyes. "There he goes again with his forest nonsense." Red turned his gaze to Nathaniel sitting in the corner. "You ever feel watched out there?" he asked quietly. Nathaniel hesitated. "Sometimes." Red nodded. "Sometimes is enough." Across town, in the smaller, river-hugging neighborhood where the Cotton family lived, Althea's parents sat in their dim kitchen that same night. The lantern flickered against the walls, casting trembling shadows. Mary Cotton was a slender woman with strong hands and a voice that never wavered when she sang hymns. But that night, her hands refused to stop shaking. Her husband, Henry Cotton, was a taller man with broad shoulders and a face cut by years of hard labor. He stared at the empty chair where Althea usually sat. "She knows the way home," Henry murmured again and again, as if trying to hold back dread by force of repetition. "She's clever. You know she is." Mary pressed a hand to her lips. "Cleverness don't help against grown men," she whispered, "or creatures in that forest." Henry swallowed hard. "We'll find her." Mary looked into his eyes. "Promise me, say it." Henry wiped his face with a shaking hand. "I promise." Though neither of them believed human promises had any power in Gideon Hollow. Mary recounted that last morning again. Her voice hollow. "She was humming when she left. 'Nearer, my God, to thee,' same as always. She said she'd be back before the wash dried." Henry's voice cracked. "She always comes back." Mary shook her head. "Not this time." Outside, the river murmured against its banks, as if whispering secrets to anyone brave enough to listen. Their daughter, Althea May Cotton, had been born during a spring thunderstorm. Mary swore lightning had cracked the sky the moment the girl first cried. She had the kind of voice older women said was a gift, one that could thread sunlight through sorrow. Her braid swung when she walked. Her stride was quick, her curiosity relentless. She collected river stones and pressed flowers between Bible pages, and she knew to avoid the forest after dark. But that day, she hadn't come home. Her absence pressed on the Cotton household like a weight that suffocated sleep. Each hour that passed felt like a door closing, one by one, sealing hope inside a shrinking room. Henry bowed his head at the kitchen table. "If they hurt her," he murmured. Mary gripped his hand tightly. "We will not speak that. Not yet." But in the silence that followed, the truth existed anyway. Raw, unspoken, terrible. By the time dawn arrived and Nathaniel Brome dragged himself out of those haunted trees, trembling and blood-soaked, the characters central to the tragedy were already intertwined by fate. Some out of cruelty, some out of fear, some out of innocence, all of them bound to the coming storm. And deep in Gideon Hollow, where the air smelled of wet cedar and old secrets, the forest waited to reveal what it had seen and what it had taken. Long before the 5 hunters vanished, Gideon Hollow had been stirring with quiet warnings, small, eerie tremors in the fabric of daily life that most dismissed as superstition. The forest did not shout its dangers. It whispered them, as though testing who among the townsfolk still remembered how to listen. It began with the dogs. For weeks before Althea Cotton disappeared, hounds across Calvary Ridge started acting strangely. Animals that once raced eagerly into the tree line now planted their paws and refused to move, hackles rising at sounds only they seemed able to hear. Henry Cotton's old shepherd mix, Juniper, once loyal enough to trail Althea anywhere, had begun growling at the forest edge whenever they passed, not at anything visible, just the space between trees, as though scenting something invisible drifting in the shadows. "Never seen her behave like that," Henry muttered one evening, tugging gently at Juniper's collar. "Come on, girl. Ain't nothing there." Juniper let out a low, trembling whine. Althea watched quietly, her fingers twined in her skirt. "Maybe she hears something we don't," she said. Mary Cotton shivered. "Dogs see what people refuse." Henry forced a chuckle. "You and your stories, Mary." But Juniper refused to go near the tree line again. Then came the river incident. A boy from the sawmill, Jimmy Lorne, claimed he'd seen something pale drifting under the water near the bend where the creek widened. He came running into town, breathless and mud-streaked, insisting he'd glimpsed a hand rising from the current, small, slim, and reaching. But when asked to show where, he led a group of men back to the riverbank, only to find the water still and empty, sunlight dappling across its surface like nothing had ever disturbed it. Jimmy stammered excuses. "It was there, I swear it, just under the water, like someone waving, like asking to be pulled out." The men laughed, clapped him on the back, called him a wild-tongued boy who needed work instead of imagination. But several shared uneasy glances behind him. And Mary Cotton, who did not mock rivers or the things that sometimes lived in them, lit an extra candle that night. Around that same time, old Mavis Green, the washerwoman who lived near the church, spoke of hearing humming at dusk when she hung her linens. Not birdsong, not wind, but the voice of a young girl singing from deep within the woods. A soft, distressingly familiar melody. "Sounded like Nearer My God to Thee," Mavis whispered to her neighbor, her fingers curling around the clothespins in her apron pocket. "Same tune little Althea likes to carry, but the voice weren't right. It sounded hollow, thin, like it was coming from far away, but close at the same time." Her neighbor crossed herself. "You hearing the dead before they die?" Mavis shook her head. "God help me, it didn't sound dead. It sounded lost." These small events, scattered like breadcrumbs, were dismissed by most of the town. Men spoke instead about crops and debts and the coming winter. Women sewed, ironed, traded preserves. And children whispered ghost tales by lamplight, half believing, half thrilled.
First uncovered the board.
But Althea noticed,
Warped pine,
taped,
blackened by time.
in the days before she vanished, she had become unusually quiet, glancing over her shoulder when walking past Gideon Hollow, humming to herself only when others were around, as though silence made her feel exposed. Henry caught her once staring into the forest, lips parted like she was listening to words carried on the wind.
When the foreman saw the strange wooden shape beneath the mud,
Althea blinked.
The engine shut down.
"I thought someone called my name."
The men claimed
frowned.
they could hear something tapping on the underside of the board.
She shook her head.
Like the thin knocking of fingertips.
He placed a hand on her shoulder.
The police
"If you hear someone calling you from that forest, you turn around and walk away. Don't matter who it sounds like. Understand?" Althea nodded, but her gaze lingered on the trees a moment longer, long enough for Henry's unease to deepen.
The cavity was not a coffin.
The night before she disappeared, she sat by the river, knees tucked to her chest, staring at the water as though waiting for something to rise from beneath its surface. Juniper whined beside her, ears pinned. Mary found her there long after sunset.
Still suspended by remnants of
"What are you doing out here?"
fused into the charred wood.
Althea hesitated.
The
river was
shaped like a boy's
talking.
face. Eyes
Mary
closed,
stiffened.
mouth open
Talking
in a silent
how?
cry.
Like it was calling
Authorities
someone,
sealed the site
not me,
immediately.
just calling.
The pendant, barely
Mary
identified,
knelt, brushing
was
her
sent to
daughter's
experts.
cheek.
But
There are
someone
things
in
in
that
this
chain,
world that
no
echo
one
what
ever
we fear.
confessed.
You stay
leaked
away
a
from those
detail
echoes
that the
here.
city wished had remained
Althea
buried.
nodded, but her
The
eyes
artifact,
drifted
they
back to the
claimed,
river,
matched
troubled.
descriptions from an 1841
Miles away,
police ledger
in the larger
referencing
homes of the white
the lost
families,
black boy up
other
Magazine
signs
Street.
emerged.
A case
Omens,
so
even
disturbing
those
that the
accustomed to
pages
power
had been
could not
removed
entirely
generations
ignore.
ago. A case
Wardell
rumored to
Pierce's
involve one of
horses refused to
Charleston's
drink from the
wealthiest
trough the
families.
morning before the
A
hunt.
case whispered to have
They
ended
backed
with a
away,
secret burial
snorting,
and an unmarked
eyes
grave
rolling.
somewhere near the
When
very
he
blocks
approached,
now choked
he
by
saw the water
tourists
rippling
clutching
unnaturally
praline bags
despite
and
the still
camera
air.
straps.
He stirred it
Official
with a
channels
stick,
brushed
but
aside
found
the
nothing
rumor,
beneath.
calling it
Yet the
speculative
uneasy
at
quiver
best.
of it clung
But
to his
locals,
nerves like a warning.
especially the older ones,
Cutter's
knew
hounds
better.
whined through the
They
night.
had heard their grandparents
Red
speak of the
Wardell
lost
heard
boy in
scratching at his
hushed
cabin
tones
wall.
during storms.
Ellis
When
Holden
shutters
smoked
rattled
half a
and
pack of
river
cigarettes
winds
on his
extinguished
porch,
candle
staring
flames.
into the tree line
They
with a
remembered
tightening
the
jaw,
warnings.
as though recognizing
Never
an
walk
old
alone
enemy
past
he'd
Magazine
hoped never
Street
to meet
after
again.
sundown. Never
Something's
ignore the
off,
sound of a child
Holden muttered to
calling your
himself.
name. And if you ever come
Forests
upon a
too
bronze
quiet.
face half buried
The
in
next
the soil,
day, when
turn around and
Althea
leave
did not
before you hear
return
the second
home,
knock.
these quiet omens began to form
Tonight
the
we step
outline
into
of
the
something
story
darker,
Charleston tried to forget.
something the town had been
Because where a
trying
city
not to
chooses
see.
to place its silence
And
often
when the
reveals
5
what it
hunters
fears
marched
most.
into Gideon
And
Hollow,
the tale of the lost
rifles
black boy,
raised, bravado
his life,
loud,
his
they
disappearance,
stepped over
and the
those warnings
powerful
like
figures
crossing a
entangled in
threshold
his
into a
fate
place that
may
had
be
never
one of the
wanted them.
darkest threads woven into
Deep
the
in the
fabric of the
forest,
American
the wind
South.
stilled completely.
Before we continue
Birds
with
fell
the story
silent,
of the lost boy of
and
Magazine
somewhere
Street,
between the pines,
join our community
a girl's
of mystery
voice,
lovers.
thin,
Hit subscribe
trembling,
and tell us in the
wrong,
comments which
began
state you're
humming a
listening
hymn
from.
no longer meant
Your
for human
support
ears.
helps us uncover more forgotten stories.
Fear in
like
Calvary
this one.
Ridge did not arrive all at once.
The Charleston of the
It seeped in,
1840s was a
slow
city
and
balanced
heavy,
between
like
grace
damp
and
rising
rot.
through the
Its
floorboards of an
pastel
old house.
facades concealing a
The morning
thousand
Nathaniel
quiet
Brome
tragedies.
crawled from Gideon
Even
Hollow,
then,
the town awoke
visitors spoke
unsure
of
of
its
what
beauty.
exactly had
Horse
gone
hooves
wrong.
clattered over
Only
cobblestone
that something had
streets
snapped,
lined with
and the air
grand
itself felt
townhouses.
different.
The scent of
Too
salt
sharp,
from the harbor mingled
too
with
watchful.
magnolia blossoms. Church
Word
bells
traveled
marked the
fast.
hours, filling
By
the narrow
mid-morning, a
alleys
small
with a
crowd
solemn
had
rhythm
gathered
that
outside the
seemed
sheriff's
older than the
office,
city
boots
itself.
crunching on frosted
But
dirt,
for all its
breath
charm,
misting in the
Charleston
cold.
was a place defined
Nathaniel
by deep
lay on a
social
cot
divides.
inside,
An elegant
shivering
mask
uncontrollably,
stretched thin over the brutal
eyes
machinery
darting at
of
every
the antebellum
shadow.
South.
A doctor had been summoned,
At dawn,
though he appeared more for
the
show
city
than
stirred with
treatment.
a rigid choreography.
The young man's wounds
White
were minor
families
compared to
stepped
whatever
onto
haunted
porches
him
to
from
sip
within.
sweetened tea, while
What happened
enslaved
out
men
there?
and women
Someone
moved in
asked.
silence around
Where are
them,
the others?
clearing ash from
Did
fireplaces
they find the
and
girl?
drawing water from wells.
Sheriff
At
Halverston
the
stepped
market on
outside
Meeting
to
Street,
quiet them,
the day
his
began
face
with
tight.
the calls of vendors.
Let the boy breathe, he said.
Fishmongers boasting
He's
of
in
their
no
morning
state to
catch.
speak. But
Farmers
people
selling
talked anyway.
squash and rice,
Townsfolk
and
always
seamstresses
did.
offering hand-stitched
Mavis
garments.
Green, the
The air
washerwoman,
swelled with
clutched
sound.
her shawl around her
Voices
shoulders.
bargaining,
I told you
livestock
something was
bleating,
wrong in those
wagon
woods,
wheels grinding.
she muttered. Didn't I say it? Didn't I warn? Hush now, someone snapped. Don't make it worse. Mavis glared. Worse is already here. Henry and Mary Cotton arrived not long after. They stood apart from the murmuring crowd, grief etched into the lines around their mouths, fear flickering like candlelight in their eyes. Mary clutched the small cloth pouch Althea used to collect river stones. She hadn't let go of it since dawn. Henry approached the sheriff. Sir, he said, voice steady though his hands trembled. I need to see him. I need to know what he saw. Halverston exhaled through his nose. He disliked being petitioned, especially by those he believed beneath him. Henry, the boy nearly died. You can't. Mary stepped forward. He is the last one to see our daughter alive. The sheriff paused. His gaze softened a fraction. Let the doctor finish. Then you may speak with him. Mary nodded, though every muscle in her body strained forward, ready to burst through the door. Inside that dim room, Nathaniel Brome stared at the ceiling, lips moving silently. When the doctor waved an alcohol-soaked cloth beneath his nose, Nathaniel recoiled violently. No, he gasped. No smoke, no fire. Don't put light near the trees. They don't like it when you bring light. Nathaniel, the doctor said softly. You're safe now. Nathaniel's gaze snapped toward him. Safe? You think I came out safe? You think I left safe? The doctor exchanged a look with the sheriff. Son, we need you to calm down. Nathaniel began shaking. They burned her blood, he whispered. And the forest swallowed the rest. When Henry Cotton heard that murmur, muffled through the wooden door, his knees nearly buckled. Later, when the doctor finally stepped aside and allowed the Cottons inside, Nathaniel had quieted into a trembling, pale statue of himself. Henry approached cautiously, Mary clutching his arm. "Nathaniel," Henry said gently. "Son, look at me." Nathaniel flinched but did not turn away. "Please," Henry pleaded, "tell us, did you see our Althea?" Nathaniel lowered his eyes. "She was—" His voice cracked. "She was singing." Mary's breath hitched. "Singing?" She wasn't right. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't human, not anymore. Mary staggered backward. Henry caught her, fighting his own urge to collapse. Nathaniel pressed his palms to his temples. She was calling, and the others thought it was a trick. Cutter said he'd drag her out by her hair if she didn't come quietly. His voice trembled. But the forest, it wanted them. It wanted us. And she led us deeper. Henry's jaw tightened. "Led you how?" "She moved. Wrong." Nathaniel swallowed hard. Like her bones didn't remember how to walk. Like something else was using her. Mary let out a soft, broken sound. Nathaniel closed his eyes. We followed. She slipped between the pines like a shadow. And the deeper we went, the louder the humming became. It wasn't coming from her anymore. It was coming from everywhere. He began shaking again. I told them we needed to turn back. "What did they say?" Henry asked quietly. Nathaniel opened his eyes, and they were full of tears. "Cutter hit me." Henry's expression darkened. Pierce laughed. Halden just stared at the trees. Said he'd seen this before. Said the forest was awake. Red told them all to shut their damn mouths before something heard. Nathaniel dug his nails into his palms. Something did hear. Henry leaned closer. What happened? Nathaniel did not answer. His breath grew shallow. Sweat beaded at his forehead, and then he began whispering over and over, like a prayer too broken to save him. It was waiting for us, waiting for her. She went to it. Or it went to her. I don't know. I don't know anymore. Mary stepped forward, voice trembling but steady. Nathaniel, where is my daughter? Nathaniel's eyes snapped open. Terror filled them completely. In the dark, he whispered, where the trees bend backward. Mary's scream filled the small room. The sheriff ordered a search party by noon, largely because the Brome family demanded it, not because the Cottons had. The white families of the missing men gathered in frantic clusters, their panic louder, heavier, and far more influential. Martha Cutter stormed into the street demanding the sheriff find her husband. You let my Tom walk in there. You let him go and now he's gone. Sheriff Halverston tried to calm her. Martha! Don't you Martha me, she spat. Those woods ain't cursed. Something dragged them in. Something took them. You bring my husband back. From his porch across the street, Reverend Alder watched the commotion with narrowed eyes, fingers wrapped around the wooden railing like gripping a pulpit. The Reverend was a rigid man, his sermon steeped in fire and brimstone certainty. He believed sin breathed like a living thing, and that God punished communities, not merely individuals. 5 men lost, he murmured, and a child missing before them. These are not scattered misfortunes. This is judgment. His wife, Ella Alder, touched his arm. Judgment for what? For letting old evils go unburied. She paled. You mean the Hollow? I mean, he said, that some places remember wickedness too well. As the sheriff organized men to head into the forest, the Cottons stood apart. No one asked them to join the search. No one offered condolences. They were treated like shadows haunting the edge of the gathering, a reminder no one wanted. Henry approached the sheriff regardless. Let me come. She's my daughter. Sheriff Halverston shook his head. You'd only slow the men down. Henry's jaw clenched hard enough to ache. Sheriff! I said no. Mary touched his arm. Henry! Her voice was soft, defeated. Let them go. Henry turned to her, grief contorting his features. They won't find her. Mary's lip quivered. I know. Behind them, townsfolk whispered. What if the girl brought something out there? Her people talk about spirits by the river. Maybe they stirred up something they shouldn't. Don't say that where her parents can hear. They know. Mary heard every word. She held her head high anyway. By mid-afternoon, the search party of 9 men disappeared into Gideon Hollow. The forest swallowed the sound of their footsteps. Within minutes, it was as though they had never entered at all. Hours passed. The sun sank. No one returned. As dusk bled into night, fear settled over the town like a heavy quilt. Lamps flickered behind curtains. Doors were bolted early. Mothers pulled their children close. The dogs, those that had not already fled into hidden corners, whined low, ears pinned. Henry Cotton stood alone by the riverbank where Althea had last been seen, his breath fogged in the cold air, rising like smoke. Mary found him long after dark. Henry, she whispered, come home. He didn't turn. She's out there. I know. They won't bring her back. No, Mary murmured. They won't. Henry's voice cracked. Then who will? Mary slipped her hand into his. We will. She knew the risk. She knew the forest was alive with something ancient and watching. But the love for a child does not measure risk. It steps into darkness even when the darkness swallows whole. Before they could take a single step toward the tree line, however, distant shouting rose from town. Urgent, frantic. They ran back toward the sound. At the sheriff's office, lanterns blazed. Men crowded around something sprawled in the dirt. Mary pushed through. Henry froze beside her. It was one of the search party, Thomas Rourke, his clothes torn, his hair matted with leaves, his face pale as candle wax. He lay half-conscious, muttering incoherently. When the sheriff knelt beside him, Rourke seized Halverston's sleeve with trembling fingers. They're gone, he gasped. They're all gone. Who? The sheriff demanded. Everyone. All of them. The forest. It moved. His words spiraled into sobs. Someone fetched the doctor. Someone else fetched the reverend, but nothing could steady the man's trembling. What do you mean it moved? Halverston pressed. Rourke shook his head wildly. Trees ain't trees in there, he whispered. And the girl, she ain't a girl. Mary covered her mouth. Henry stiffened, eyes burning with something between horror and fury. Rourke grabbed Halverston's collar and screamed, Don't go back in! Don't you dare go back! It don't let you leave! Then he collapsed. Silence cracked through the crowd like thunder. Reverend Alder stepped forward, voice solemn. This is not a crime, he said. This is a plague upon the soul of this town. Mary Cotton stared at him. My daughter is not a plague. The Reverend's expression didn't soften. Some burdens choose the innocent as their vessel. Henry stepped between them, fists clenched. Say another word, he growled, and you'll answer to me. But Alder simply turned away, murmuring a prayer under his breath. Behind them, Rourke moaned in pain, his eyes rolling. They sang, he whispered. All around me, voices of children, voices that weren't children. Sheriff Halverston swallowed hard. Whose voices? Rourke. Gentle note on a sob. Ours. The crowd recoiled. Something was happening in Gideon Hollow. Something no one in Calvary Ridge understood or dared name. And as the lanterns flickered, casting long shadows across the street, the town realized the truth. This was only the beginning. What do you think? Guilty souls cursed by God, or victims of madness? Tell us below. Your theories matter here. Night fell over Calvary Ridge like a closing fist, slow, merciless, suffocating. And in that darkness, something ancient in Gideon Hollow seemed to stretch awake, as though the screams of the vanished men had fed it. The air grew colder. The wind that once moved through the pines like a soft lullaby now slithered with an intelligence that set even the bravest men trembling. The sheriff barricaded the town as best he could. Lanterns burning at every street corner, patrols marching in pairs, rifles held too tightly. But light could not keep away what had already been allowed inside. People locked their doors, whispered prayers, and watched the tree line as though expecting it to blink. Inside the small cabin where they'd taken Thomas Rourke, the man lay delirious, muttering fragments of the horror he'd seen. The doctor tried to calm him with laudanum, but Rourke's body rejected it. His limbs jerked uncontrollably. His eyes rolled back, and whenever the lantern flame wavered, he would scream, long, raw cries that made the hair on the back of everyone's neck stand. "They're in the dark," he whispered hoarsely. "All 5 of them. I heard them. I heard them." "Who?" the sheriff demanded again. Rourke's jaw trembled. "The hunters." "Alive?" Rourke hesitated, and that hesitation spoke its own truth. "Not alive," he managed. "Not dead, just caught." May Cotton stood at the doorway, unable to step inside. She clutched Althea's pouch of river stones so tightly the fabric nearly tore. Henry paced behind her, wearing a groove into the floorboards. His voice was low, ragged. "We should go now, before the thing grows bolder." Mary didn't answer. Her eyes flicked toward Nathaniel Brome, lying catatonic in the cot across the room. The young man's lips moved silently, as though reciting a prayer or confessing a sin he didn't have the courage to say aloud. Suddenly, Nathaniel gasped. Mary rushed to him. "Nathaniel." His eyes snapped open, but they did not focus. He seemed to stare straight through her. "It found them," he whispered. "It followed her singing. It followed us." Mary's voice trembled. "My daughter, did she lead you?" Nathaniel shuddered. "She didn't lead us. She warned us. But Cutter didn't listen. None of them listened." Mary's breath hitched. "Warned?" Nathaniel nodded slowly, tears pooling. Something took her voice. Something twisted it. She wasn't calling us deeper. She was trying to drown us out. The humming was getting louder, louder, until it was coming from everywhere at once. Henry stepped forward. "What was?" Nathaniel choked out the answer. "The dead." The room felt suddenly small, airless. Nathaniel continued, voice thin. "We heard them first. Soft moans between the branches. Then whispers. Then screams that sounded like they were buried under the roots." The sheriff stiffened. "What screams?" Nathaniel shut his eyes. "Children." Mary's knees buckled. Henry caught her before she hit the floor. Nathaniel's fingers curled into the sheets. "She tried to warn us. She tried to tell us not to go where the ground dips. That's where the voices live." Henry stared. "What ground?" Nathaniel swallowed hard. "Where the trees bend backwards." That phrase, those impossible words, settled over the room like a curse. By dawn, Calvary Ridge was no longer a town at uneasy rest. It was a town at war, against fear, against the unknown, against itself. And fear makes people cruel. Sheriff Halberstam stood on the steps outside his office, barking orders. "No one goes into the hollow unless I send them. No one goes near the tree line without a partner. And if anyone hears singing, you run." Townswomen clutched each other, eyes darting. Men whispered about curses, Witches, spirits. Some blamed the Cottons outright. "This started with that girl," one man muttered. "You seen how she looks at people? Always quiet, always wandering by herself." Another spat. "Her folk have stories about ghosts in the river. What if she brought something out?" Henry Cotton heard every word. He turned, fists ready, but Mary stepped between him and the crowd. "Not now," she whispered. "Save your strength." Strength would be needed, more than anyone knew. Reverend Alder called an emergency prayer service at the church. People packed the pews, white families in the front, black families squeezed into the back, divided even by fear. The Reverend slammed his fist against the pulpit. "This is punishment," he cried. "Punishment for mixing with shadows. Punishment for letting sin nestle in our midst." Murmurs rose. Some nodded. Others looked away, ashamed. Mary Cotton stood in the back row, arms wrapped around herself. When the Reverend's gaze found hers, his voice sharpened. "The river girl wandered where she shouldn't," he thundered. "She opened a door, and now the forest has come to collect its price." Henry surged forward. "You shut your mouth," he growled. Gasps scattered through the pews. Reverend Alder did not flinch. "If the father won't confess, the forest will." Henry lunged. Two men grabbed him, pulling him back. Mary stepped forward instead, her voice low, trembling, yet strong enough to silence the church. "My daughter is not a sin," she said, "and she is not yours to speak of." The Reverend's jaw tightened. "Everything in this town is God's to speak of." Mary's eyes glistened. "Then pray for her return, Reverend, if your God is listening." Alder's face darkened, but he said nothing. Not a single soul in the church dared meet Mary's gaze afterward. That evening, as the sun slid behind the ridge, the sheriff called a council of men to plan a second retrieval party, a larger, more heavily armed expedition. Cutter's family demanded it. Pierce's widow demanded it. Even Halden's estranged brother came, pale with worry. Henry Cotton stood at the edge of the room, though no one had invited him. Sheriff Halverston unrolled a rough map of Gideon Hollow. "We search here," he said. "This time, no splitting up." Red Wardell lingered near the door, his hat gripped tightly in both hands. His face looked hollowed out, haunted. Pierce's widow approached him. "Red, you were with them. You know those woods. Tell us where they'd have gone." Red's eyes flicked upward. "You don't want to follow where we went. Tell me," she pleaded. Red swallowed hard. "There's a clearing halfway in. Looks like nothing grows there. We heard her voice there. That's when—" His breath quivered. "That's when the forest changed." The room fell silent. "Changed how?" someone whispered. Red lowered his head. "The trees bent." He shivered, like ribs closing. Henry's voice broke through the hush. "I'm going with you." "No," Halverston said immediately. Henry stepped forward. "Sheriff, you'll slow us down." Henry's voice cracked. "It's my child. And it's my job to protect the people going in," Halverston snapped. Mary appeared behind Henry, her presence soft but immovable. "If he can't go," she said, "I will." The sheriff paled. "Mary, absolutely not." Her gaze hardened. "Tell me one good reason." "Because whatever took those men will not spare you." She stepped closer. "It already took my daughter. I've nothing left to fear." Red Wardell's voice broke the tension. "Let them come," he said quietly. "If we find her, they'll need to be there. And if we don't—" He swallowed. "They'll need to see the truth." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "They come, but they follow orders." Henry nodded. Mary did not. Just past midnight, something happened that shattered any illusion that the town still held control. Thomas Rourke, delirious, feverish, began screaming inside the cabin. The doctor rushed to him. Rourke arched backward, limbs jerking. "Make it stop," he howled. "Make it stop!" "Nathaniel," the doctor called. "Help me hold him." Nathaniel stumbled over, but the moment he touched Rourke's arm, Rourke froze, utterly still. His eyes rolled forward, wide and white. Then he spoke, but not in his own voice. It was a girl's voice, soft, singing. Mary Cotton dropped to her knees. Althea's hymn, her favorite hymn, slid from Rourke's throat like silk dipped in ash. "Nearer, my God, to thee." The doctor stepped back, horrified. He's mimicking her." But Mary shook her head. "No." Rourke's head turned, slowly, unnaturally, toward the window facing the forest. He sang louder. Henry backed away. Nathaniel collapsed against the wall. Rourke's voice stretched, bending into notes no human throat could form. The lantern flame fluttered violently. The air grew colder. And then Rourke gasped, a wet, choking gasp, and whispered, "It's here." Every lantern in the cabin flickered, went out. Screams tore through the dark. When townsfolk burst into the room moments later, Rourke was dead, his body arched backward, face frozen in a soundless cry. Nathaniel was unconscious. And carved into the wooden floorboards, directly beneath Rourke's body, were two words scratched deep into the wood with desperate force. "She waits." At dawn, the second search party gathered at the forest edge, armed with rifles, torches, lanterns, and prayers. Sheriff Halverston led. Red Wardell followed, carrying Cutter's old rifle like a burden. Nathaniel, though barely coherent, was forced to come. They needed his memory. Henry and Mary stood at the rear, holding hands. The forest loomed before them like the mouth of a cathedral built by teeth and shadow. "Stay close," the sheriff said. "No matter what you hear." Red swallowed hard. "What if we hear her?" The sheriff hesitated. "Especially then." Together they stepped into Gideon Hollow, where the air smelled of rot and cold breath, and the trees stood twisted like mourners at a grave. No birds sang. No wind blew. And somewhere in the distance, impossibly soft, a young girl began to hum. If you stood in that room, would you call it crime or sacrifice? Leave your answer. The moment the party crossed beneath the first arch of pines, the world behind them seemed to seal shut. The air thickened, sounds muffled, and the light dimmed as though the sun had decided not to follow. Gideon Hollow was never a welcoming place, but that morning it felt sentient, pulsing with a quiet hunger. Sheriff Halverston raised his lantern, its flame trembling wildly. "Stay in line," he ordered. "No wandering, no chasing sounds, and for God's sake don't answer if something calls your name." Nathaniel Brome stumbled behind him, still unsteady, still pale. His breath stuttered in the cold, his eyes darting like he expected the trees themselves to lean down and whisper threats. "They're watching," he murmured. "They remember us." Mary Cotton walked silently beside Henry, her face set with a determination that bordered on fearlessness. She did not flinch when branches snapped underfoot, nor when the wind seemed to twist words out of the rustling leaves. If she felt fear, she hid it behind the certainty that her daughter was alive, or at least reachable. Henry was less composed. His jaw clenched, his shoulders tense, his rifle gripped so tightly his knuckles whitened. The sound of every twig breaking sent him turning in sudden fury. "Althea!" he called once, before Halverston turned and hissed, "Not another word out of you unless you want every one of us dead." Henry swallowed his rage, but Mary pressed his hand, reminding him silently why he had to hold himself steady. Red Wardell trailed near the middle, Cutter's old rifle slung across his back. He moved with the caution of a man stepping through a memory he wished he'd forgotten. His breaths were shallow, his gaze sweeping constantly as though trying to identify a pattern in the chaos of trunks and shadows. "The forest is different," he said under his breath. "More twisted, like it changed overnight." "It did," Nathaniel whispered. "It changes for them." "For who?" Red's voice was brittle. Nathaniel didn't answer. An hour into the hollow, the first sign appeared. Cutter's hat. It hung suspended from a branch, swaying gently though no breeze stirred. A smear of dried blood streaked one side, dark as iron. Below it, the leaves were crushed. Footprints, drag marks, something pulled through the soil. Martha Cutter, who had insisted on coming despite Halverston's objections, let out a cry and rushed forward. Red grabbed her arm. "No," he barked, yanking her back just as the ground shifted beneath where she had stepped. Everyone froze. The soil there was not firm earth. It was loose, as though something had burrowed just beneath the surface. Sheriff Halverston knelt, brushed aside leaves, and recoiled. The ground beneath was hollow, soft, freshly disturbed. Grave soil. But there was no body. Mary stared at the empty pit. "What is this?" Red swallowed. "That's where he went in." Halverston looked up sharply. "Went in?" Red nodded, voice shaking. "Cutter, he didn't fall. He got pulled." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. No, don't say that." But Nathaniel stepped forward, trembling. "It's true. The ground moves down there, like hands pulling." Halverston glared at him. "And you didn't think to mention this before today?" Nathaniel's lips quivered. "You wouldn't have believed me." Mary stepped closer to the pit. "Did Cutter scream?" Red nodded once, a small, haunted movement. "Everyone screamed," he murmured. The wind stirred, just enough to shift the hat, enough to make it fall. When it hit the ground, something scurried beneath the soil, too fast to see clearly, but large enough to make the earth ripple. The group stumbled back. "Keep moving," Halverston ordered. "We're close." How he knew, he could not say. But he was right. The deeper they went, the stranger the forest grew. At first, only the trees leaned at odd angles. Then the bark appeared scraped, as though something had clawed its way through. Then the branches bent in directions no storm could have forced them. "Trees aren't supposed to do that," Henry muttered. "They're not trees anymore," Nathaniel whispered. The forest floor sloped downward, the air turning damp. A smell rose, earthy, metallic. The smell of rot. The smell of old wounds. Somewhere ahead, faint at first, then clearer. Humming. Soft. Girl-like. A voice carried through the hollow, drifting between trunks with impossible grace. Mary's breath caught. "Althea!" Sheriff Halverston snapped. "Don't run!" But she was already stepping ahead. Henry grabbed her arm. "Mary, wait!" She did, but her eyes never left the path ahead. Nathaniel shook violently. "It's not her. It's using her voice. It used her voice before." Red spoke low. "How can you tell the difference?" "It sounds like her," Nathaniel whispered. "But not from her. Like it's remembering her voice instead of speaking it." Mary's eyes brimmed, but she said nothing. The humming grew louder, stronger, and then, cutting through the branches like a blade, another sound emerged. Sobbing. A man sobbing. Halden's voice. Red stiffened. "Ellis?" The sobbing turned into coughing. Then frantic whispers. "Don't let it see you! Don't let it see you! Don't let it—" Sheriff Halverston lifted his lantern. "Ellis, Where are you?" The sobbing stopped abruptly. Silence. Then, behind you. Every lantern flickered. Henry spun, rifle raised, but the voice had come from nowhere. From everywhere. Or from beneath. The ground shifted. Mary screamed as soil cracked open like splitting skin. A hand shot up from the earth, gray, swollen, slick with mud. Fingers clawed at the air. Then another hand, and another. Cutter's voice shrieked from below. "Help me! God, help!" Martha Cutter ran forward, sobbing. "Tom!" Red grabbed her from behind. "That's not him." "Yes, it is," she cried. "He's calling me. He's calling my name." "No," Red roared. "He's dead." The scream that rose from the pit was not human, not a husband calling for a wife. It was deeper, hungrier, a twisting pitch that no living throat could shape. The hand sank back into the soil. Dragged down by something unseen, the ground sealed over like fresh mud. Silence. Martha collapsed to her knees, sobbing into her hands. No one moved to comfort her. Not even those who had known her for 20 years. "This place is wrong," Red said finally. "We have to turn back." Halverston squared his jaw. "Not without the girl." Red pointed at the earth. "The Hollow's not going to give her up." Nathaniel stepped forward, trembling. "Yes, it will. It wants to show us. It wants someone to see." "Why?" Mary whispered. Nathaniel's voice broke. "Because it wants us to bury what really happened." The humming resumed. Softer. Closer. Mary stepped toward the sound, and this time Henry didn't stop her. They followed the voice down the slope into the heart of Gideon Hollow. The clearing revealed itself suddenly, like stepping into a nightmare carved into the land. No grass grew here. No bushes. Just bare earth, soft as fresh clay. The trees around the clearing bent backward, as though forced to bow. Henry and Mary froze. Nathaniel dropped to his knees, face pale. "This is where it happened," he whispered. "What?" Halverston demanded. Nathaniel looked up, tears falling freely. "This is where the girl stopped, where she turned toward us, where she smiled." Mary's breath hitched. "Althea, don't smile like that," her mother whispered. "How did she smile?" Nathaniel's voice was barely audible, like she wasn't in her own skin. Mary pressed a hand to her chest, stifling a sob. Henry stared at Nathaniel, rage simmering. "You should have protected her." "I tried," Nathaniel cried. "She told us to run, under her breath, so quiet Cutter didn't hear." Red inhaled sharply. "She spoke?" Nathaniel nodded. Not like the singing, not like the humming. She whispered, "Don't let it touch me." Mary collapsed into Henry, shaking. Nathaniel rose slowly, pointing toward the center of the clearing. "It touched her there." The soil shifted. Something pushed upward. A small, delicate object broke through, the handle of a tin pail. Althea's. Mary let out a choked cry. Henry grabbed her tightly before she fell into the clearing. The pail rose slowly, as though lifted by unseen fingers, and dropped at the clearing's edge. Empty. Bent. Blackened. Halverston approached with trembling steps. "Mary, I'm sorry." Mary looked up sharply. "She is not dead." Nathaniel shook his head violently. "No, she isn't. That's the problem." Before Halverston could question him, a thin, reedy whistle sliced through the clearing. Then footsteps. Soft, bare, wrong. Mary's eyes widened. "Althea!" A silhouette emerged between the trees. Small, slim, braids hanging. Mary sobbed. "Althea!" She ran. Henry grabbed for her, but she slipped from his grasp and sprinted into the clearing. Halverston shouted, "Mary, don't!" The girl stepped into the lantern light. Her face was streaked with mud. Her dress torn. Her eyes were not human. Black, glass-like, reflecting the lantern flame as though absorbing it. Mary slowed. "Althea?" Her voice trembled. "Sweetheart, look at me." The girl tilted her head. The movement was jerky, as if fighting unseen strings. Her mouth twitched, opened, and when she spoke, it was not her voice. "Mother." Mary's breath froze. Henry raised his rifle, but couldn't fire. Red whispered, "God have mercy." The girl took another step, so soft it was almost soundless. Nathaniel dropped to his knees, sobbing. "She's caught. It has her." Halverston raised his lantern higher. "Child, stop right there." The girl blinked slowly. Then she smiled. The same wrong smile Nathaniel had described. Mary screamed. Henry fired. The shot tore through the clearing, but the girl didn't flinch. She didn't bleed. She didn't even react. The bullet passed through her like smoke. The smile widened. And then the ground shook, all at once. Violently. Hands burst from the soil, dozens, clawing upward, twisting, reaching for Mary's legs. Henry lunged, dragging her backward as she screamed. The girl watched without emotion. The ground screamed with human voices, not disembodied, not ghostly. Human. Men's voices. Cutter. Pierce. Halden. Red staggered back. "No, no, no!" The hands writhed, grasping at their ankles, slick with dirt and blood. Sheriff Halverston fired wildly. The girl lifted her arm. The lantern flames extinguished instantly. Darkness swallowed them whole. Henry yelled Mary's name. Nathaniel screamed something incoherent. Red swung his rifle at something crawling toward him. The forest echoed with shrieks, human and not. And in the pitch-black clearing, over everything, the sharp tearing of soil, the ragged gasps of the living, the tortured cries of the dead, a girl's voice rose. Soft. Perfect. Althea's voice. Singing. "Nearer, my God, to thee." The darkness pulsed. The ground opened. Something vast stirred beneath them. Something waking. Something hungry. And Mary Cotton, clinging to her husband as the forest swallowed their screams, whispered one horrified truth. "That's not my daughter." The darkness in Gideon Hollow did not behave like ordinary night. It moved. It breathed. It wrapped itself around the group with a slow, patient intelligence, as if deciding which of them belonged to the living and which it would keep. The lanterns were dead. The rifles were useless. Even sound felt smothered, swallowed before it reached anyone's ears. Henry's hands fumbled through the black as he tried to pull Mary away from the grasping hands in the soil. He felt fingers, cold, slick with mud, curl around his ankle. He kicked violently, but the grip tightened. "Mary, run!" he shouted. "I can't see," she cried. Roots shifted beneath them like serpents. The ground lurched again. Someone, Nathaniel, screamed as he was dragged forward. Sheriff Halverston lunged blindly in the dark, trying to grab him, but missed. "Nathaniel!" Mary cried. A crack, sharp, sudden, split the dark, followed by a guttural moan. "Something's got him!" Red yelled. Another voice, broken and strangled, cried out from somewhere behind them. It might have been Halden's voice, or Cutter's, or something imitating them, but in the darkness it was impossible to tell. All around, the ground trembled with the movement of bodies beneath it. Henry's hand found Mary's. "I've got you," he whispered. "Hold tight." Mary clung to him, her breath trembling. The girl, Althea, or the thing wearing her, moved through the dark with effortless, unnatural grace. Her footsteps were soft, but clear enough that each one sounded directly behind them, then directly in front, then beside their ears. "Mother," the voice whispered again. Mary sobbed. "You are not my child?" A whisper, multiplying, fracturing, repeated her words. "Not my child, not my child, not my child." Voices, many voices, rose in unison. The dead, the lost, the forest itself. Henry felt his ears ring with a dissonance. Red roared into the black. "Show yourself!" Something answered from behind him, not a word, but a breath. A cold, wet exhale against the back of his neck. He swung Cutter's rifle like a club. Inside the pitch, the strike landed on something solid. A sound cracked through the clearing. Bones? Wood? Something caught between the two? The girl laughed. Not a child's laugh. Not a human one. High, thin, sharp, like glass breaking. Halverston yelled, "Find the edge! Find the edge of the clearing! The ground's safer at the—" He didn't finish. A heavy thud, like a tree falling, erupted near the sheriff, followed by a choking gasp. Mary screamed, "Sheriff!" No answer. Only the gurgling sound of something being pulled downward through wet soil. Red's voice cracked in terror. "We have to get out, now!" The humming grew louder, Althea's hymn twisting into distorted harmonies. It surrounded them, coming from the branches, the soil, the air itself. And then a flash. A burst of lantern light as Nathaniel somehow managed to spark a match. The world snapped into view for the briefest moment, and reality buckled. Bodies half buried, half emerged, writhed in the earth. Pale hands reached upward, fingers twitching. Faces, Cutter, Pierce, Halden, stared blankly with soil-packed eyes. Their ribs rose and fell despite the absence of breath. Roots grew through their wrists, their chests, their mouths. The forest had woven itself into them. Mary screamed and shielded her face as Cutter's mouth stretched impossibly wide, soil spilling out as he spoke in a voice layered with echoes. "Stay with us." Henry dragged her backward. "Move," he shouted. "We have to move." The match burned down, scorching Nathaniel's fingers. The light blinked out. Darkness again. But now the forest knew exactly where they were. Voices rose from the soil, begging, moaning, calling names. Henry's, Mary's, Red's, Nathaniel's. They called in familiar voices. Voices of loved ones long gone. Voices of those still alive. Red froze. "Mama?" he whispered. Mary slapped his arm. "It's not them." The girl's voice drifted inches from Mary's ear. "Mother!" Henry swung blindly, pushing Mary behind him. "Get away from her!" Another flash of movement in the dark. A soft tap on the ground, bare feet. Then a hand grabbed Mary's wrist. Cold. Small. Familiar. Mary screamed, "Henry!" He yanked her away, stumbling backward. Nathaniel's voice rose in despair. "It wants her! It wants the mother! It always wanted the mother!" Red shouted into the dark, voice cracking. "What does it want?" Nathaniel sobbed, "To finish what started with the others. It needs something alive." A whisper slid through the clearing. "No, it needs all of you." The earth lurched upward beneath their feet. Mary fell. Henry grabbed for her, and suddenly light. A torch flared behind them. Not one of theirs. Townfolk, 4 men, stood at the edge of the clearing, pale with terror but clutching torches high. "Sheriff sent us," one shouted. "We saw the flames go out. We came looking." They didn't finish, because in the torchlight they saw what Henry had seen. The girl, standing in the center of the clearing, head tilted, eyes black as tar, a smile carved too deep. Mary whispered one last time, "Althea." The girl blinked, and spoke in a voice layered over with something ancient. "Mother, you came too late." Something erupted from the soil at her feet, a mass of roots, bones, and hands, rising, forming, twisting upward in a grotesque tower of limbs. The townfolk screamed. One dropped his torch. The fire caught the dry leaves. Spread. Fast. Henry pulled Mary back as flame roared up the bent trees. The monstrous shape shrank from the heat. The girl's face twisted, not in pain, but in fury. A sound erupted from her throat, a shriek so high it cracked the air. The ground convulsed. Hands released. Roots recoiled. Red grabbed Nathaniel and pulled him toward the burning edge. Henry carried Mary. The town men retreated, torches swinging. The girl stepped forward, firelight reflected in her black eyes. Her skin shimmered like bark. And then she vanished. Not into the trees, not into the shadows, into the soil. Swallowed. The clearing shook once more, then stilled. The screaming stopped. The humming stopped. The forest went silent. Completely silent. Henry collapsed with Mary in his arms. Red dropped to his knees. Nathaniel sobbed into the dirt. The four rescuers stood trembling. Red whispered the only words any of them could understand. "It wasn't her." Mary wept until her voice broke. Nathaniel stared at the ground, whispering feverishly, "It's not over. She's still in there. She's still alive. Somewhere deeper." But the ground where the girl had stood was smooth, untouched, as if nothing had ever happened. The fire died as quickly as it had risen, smothered by damp soil. All that remained of the clearing was silence, and the faint, lingering scent of Althea's hymn. The survivors did not walk out of Gideon Hollow. They stumbled, half dragged, half carried by the men who had come with torches. When they finally broke past the tree line, dawn was thinning the sky, painting Calvary Ridge in a pale, indifferent blue. The moment their boots hit open ground, something in the air loosened. The weight pressing on their chests eased, but never fully left. Mary Cotton collapsed to her knees, hands buried in the frost. Henry knelt beside her, unable to speak. Red Wardell leaned against a boulder, shaking violently, eyes fixed on the tree line as though expecting it to reach after them. Nathaniel Brome vomited into the leaves, then wept silently into his own trembling hands. The four town men who had come to help stared at the survivors with an expression that was not quite pity, not quite horror, something between. None dared step closer. Sheriff Halverston was not among them. His absence hung in the air like a tolling bell. "We leave the hollow alone," Red murmured hoarsely. "We leave it now. We don't go back." Henry was still cradling Mary when he whispered, "We didn't bring her home." Mary pressed a hand to her chest, her voice hollow. "We didn't lose her either." The men shifted uneasily. "What do you mean?" one asked. Mary lifted her gaze to the trees, her eyes dry, but burned hollow. "My child is in there. Not that thing we saw. My Althea." Her voice shook once. "She's trapped, buried, alive in some way God never intended." Nathaniel whimpered. "She warned us, in the beginning, before the singing got inside her. She warned us." Red clenched his fists. "The sheriff's dead. The others, the missing men, they aren't just dead. They're used." Henry looked at him sharply. "Used how?" Red shook his head. "I don't understand it, but they aren't resting. And they won't." One of the town men spat into the dirt, trying to cover his fear. We tell the town what we saw. The truth. Exactly as it happened." Henry stared at the man, and something like bitterness twisted his mouth. "You think the truth will hold in that courthouse? You think they'll take the word of the man who came running last, or ours?" Silence fell. Mary's voice cut through it, low and certain. "The truth will not be believed. Not by those who don't want it." And she was right. Calvary Ridge shattered in the days that followed. The sheriff's body was never found. Not that the townsfolk went searching. They declared him missing and placed his badge in a box on the church altar, as though symbolism could replace flesh. Reverend Alder thundered from the pulpit that the hollow was cursed, a wound in the earth where sin festers. He condemned the forest as the devil's hand, claimed the missing were taken for their immorality, and urged the town to repent. People listened. Fear makes them listen. But Mary Cotton did not bow her head. She sat upright in the back pew, her face set with an iron fury that made Alder look away every time his gaze passed her. Red Wardell spent 3 days bedridden, trembling. When he finally emerged, he burned Cutter's rifle in his yard and nailed his windows shut from the inside. People whispered that he never slept again. Nathaniel Brome became a ghost wandering his own life. His mother found him sitting outside at dawn one morning, facing the forest, whispering, "She's calling from deeper, deeper down." He would not go near any dark room. He refused to sleep unless a lamp burned beside him. He ate nothing but bread, and when someone asked him what he had truly seen, he shook violently until his nose bled. The Cottons became the center of a cruel divide. Some townsfolk blamed them outright. That girl brought something back with her. Her people have their stories, spirits, curses. You can't carry river songs into the woods and expect nothing to answer. Others fell silent when Mary walked by, offering stiff nods or hurried retreats. A few offered timid condolences, but never lingered long enough to hear her reply. Through it all, Mary remained unbroken. Henry frayed. Each night he walked to the edge of the hollow, staring into the black where the trees began to tangle. Waiting, listening. Sometimes he thought he heard her humming. Once he swore he saw her silhouette. But each time he stepped forward, the air thickened, as though the forest were pushing him back. Mary begged him to stop. "It wants you," she whispered. "It wants what the others had." Henry placed a hand on her cheek. "And it can have me, but I won't let it keep her." Mary shook her head. "Not like this." Their grief became a quiet war, one between love and terror, sanity and devotion. But even in their darkest arguments, they never turned on each other. The hollow had taken enough. By the second week, newspapers from 3 counties descended upon Calvary Ridge. Their headlines told stories the truth could not fit inside. Sheriff and 5 men lost in forest tragedy. Search party claims quicksand caused deaths. Local child still missing. Family pleads for help. Forest closed after multiple fatalities. Not one paper printed the truth. Not one reporter mentioned the voices. Not one article dared describe the girl with black eyes. Even the rescuers who had seen the clearing refused to speak plainly once interrogated. Their statements warped, softened, bent. It was dark, confusing. The sheriff slipped and fell. The ground gave out. No, we didn't see the girl. Fear rewrote memories. Survival demanded that. Only Mary, Henry, Red, and Nathaniel remembered everything, because forgetting was impossible. The forest had carved the truth into them like initials into bark. A coroner's inquest was held for the sheriff and the missing hunters. The courtroom overflowed with frightened townsfolk, faces pale with dread disguised as a curiosity. Reverend Alder claimed moral decay had opened the door to the tragedy. Martha Cutter swore her husband had been a good man taken by evil. Pierce's widow demanded the county send men to burn the hollow to ash. Someone suggested dynamite. Someone else suggested prayer. When Mary Cotton rose to speak, the room went still. She walked to the front, shoulders square, face carved from grief and steel. Henry stood behind her, jaw clenched. Mary's voice was quiet, but every word fell into the room, like a hammer. "My daughter was taken," she said. "Not by man, not by accident, by something that lives in Gideon Hollow. Something older than this town. Something that wears the dead like clothes." Gasps rippled across the room. Reverend Alder rose. "Mrs. Cotton, this is not—" Mary's voice rose. "Let me finish." Even Alder hesitated. She continued. "You can lie to yourselves. You can lie to the newspapers, but you cannot lie to me. I saw it. I saw my daughter's face, wearing something else inside it." The courtroom buzzed with panic. Martha Cutter shouted, "You expect us to believe that madness?" Mary turned toward her. "Believe what you want, but listen to this. My child is not gone. She is trapped. And if you pretend otherwise, the hollow will take more." The coroner cleared his throat nervously. "Mrs. Cotton, we cannot record such language in an official inquiry." Mary stepped closer, eyes burning. "Then write this. Calvary Ridge is not done bleeding." The room froze. For a long moment, no one spoke. The coroner cleared his throat again. "The official verdict is accidental death, caused by unstable ground. A lie, stamped and sealed." And so the inquiry closed with the truth nailed shut like a coffin. In the weeks that followed, the hollow was declared off-limits. Signs were hammered into the trees. The sheriff's replacement posted deputies along the ridge. No one was allowed in, not for hunting, not for timber, not for anything. Not that anyone tried. The forest seemed to breathe across the fields at night. Windows rattled, dogs whined. Children woke screaming from nightmares of pale hands crawling across their beds. One morning, 3 farmhands swore they heard humming drifting across the fields at dawn. The same hymn Althea used to sing. Henry Cotton stormed out of his house with a lantern, disappearing toward the tree line. He didn't return until Mary found him hours later, curled at the forest edge, whispering her name into the dirt. Red Wardell visited once, only once, leaving a carved wooden cross at the boundary. After that, he refused to speak of it again. Nathaniel Brome left town entirely. No one saw him go. No note, no goodbye. His mother found his boots abandoned on the porch steps, pointing toward the hollow. Some believed he went into the forest. Others believed the forest came for him. No one looked. By the end of that winter, Calvary Ridge was a town marked, burned by what had taken place. Families moved away. Farms went up for sale. The church, once filled, now echoed. People no longer wandered the streets at dusk. And in the Cotton home, Mary kept Althea's little tin pail on the windowsill. Henry locked every door at night. Sometimes they dreamed of her. Sometimes they heard her humming. Once, just once, Mary swore she saw her daughter standing at the edge of the hollow at sunrise, braids hanging, eyes soft again, as if the forest had loosened its grip for a heartbeat. But when she blinked, the girl was gone. A breeze stirred the trees, and beneath it, a faint whisper. Mother. Mary did not tell Henry. Some truths cut too deep. The tragedy of Gideon Hollow never left the county records. It became a quiet stain, mentioned in hushed tones, blamed on bad weather, drunkenness, anything but the truth. Only the Cottons carried the story as it truly lived. A girl taken, men consumed, a forest awakened. and a town too afraid to face what it had allowed. So, what do you believe? Was this truth unveiled, or was it buried to protect the powerful? Write your theory in the comments. If you want us to keep digging into America's darkest history, like this video and subscribe for next week's story.